Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to the Monday, January 30th, 2017 edition of VR News. Want to start with just my initial thoughts on the smooth locomotion added to Arizona Sunshine. I know I touched on it a little bit. Just wanted to expand on that. It's very similar to me. It felt a lot like the Doom 3 BFG smooth locomotion. And I haven't tried it on touch yet, but so far with the Vive controllers, it's been great because I'm finally able to do that most basic staple of moves, the circle strafe. As a person who's played a lot of first-person games with mouse and keyboard, circle strafing is kind of your 101 first thing you learn. And not being able to do that, it was just strange. That is back. Bit of a learning curve, just trying to, get your thumb used to that maneuver. But once you do, it's pretty much second nature. So if you'd put this game aside because, you didn't want to just use the teleportation locomotion, happy to say you now have an option, and it's a pretty damn good option. So give that a shot. Next game before we get into the news, Unspoken. So this is that spellcasting game where you use the touch controllers with your hands to cast offensive spells, defensive ones, basically duel other wizards. I'd mentioned a couple of weeks ago it was going to get content update. Tomorrow that drops, new map, new summon, and a new artifact, all coming tomorrow. And then just the last thing before news, Vorpx. Vorpx is one of those tools that you want to love. You want to rally behind it because the idea is awesome. The idea being you can take pretty much any 3D first-person game and turn it into a VR experience. In practice, however, for me personally, it's been nothing short of freaking frustrating. Probably picked it up and dropped it about 3 different times because ultimately I just wasn't happy with the results. Now, in fairness, and the fact that I spent money on this damn thing, I'm going to give it another shot. Apparently, the last 2 updates have been positive in terms of improving the functionality of Vorpx. So I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt, give it a shot, and if it is as good as people are saying, probably do a video on that. So look for that, Vorpx. All right, let's jump into news and start with the topic of benchmarking. So VRMark is kind of the company name that you think of when somebody says benchmarking, right? Their 3D Mark benchmarking programs have pretty much become industry standards for benchmarking, comparing systems. And it's exactly that's kind of led to the first problem in virtual reality benchmarking. So, fast forward and VRMark creates VRMark. But by their own admission, they say, you know what, experiment with this, test with this, but please don't use it to quantify differences between systems. It's not really designed for that, and we don't really feel it's a good tool for that. So appreciate the honesty, but at the end of the day, it still left us without a tool to test virtual reality functions, graphics, processes specifically. Well, hopefully that changes with company Basemark and their virtual reality benchmarking program called VRScore. So unlike VRMark, they say you will be able to quantify differences between systems using their tool. So I've got the link for that below. Like I said, it's called VRScore, and embedded within this, guys, is probably the most gorgeous example of virtual reality yet seen. Trying to remember what the name of that is off the top of my head. I should have done this before, but it just came to mind. I think it's Showdown. It's that Rift experience where you're walking down the street, kind of in Matrix time freeze, and that big kind of scorpion mech lands in front of you, and everything's passing by you, car exploding in slow motion. Still confused, so am I. But whatever that was called, that's what this kind of looks like, but it's a full-on movie type experience. It's from Crytek, and it's called Codename Sky Harbor. So that's the VR experience they've embedded with their VR suite called VRScore. So have a look at that and let me know what you think. But me personally, I was impressed. Going to give that a shot and do exactly what they say I should be able to do, and that's compare systems. So this one against that should be fun. All right, let's talk about the Zenimax versus Oculus case super quick, because there's not much to say other than the jury has not come to a decision yet. They are still deciding. It's going to go into tomorrow. You could make speculation arguments both ways. You could argue for the defense, you could argue for the plaintiffs, and you could probably have equally convincing arguments to substantiate your argument based on them not having been able to come to a decision. Me, instead of speculating, I'm going to wait, which is, I know, the easy thing, because I'll be able to then comment on whatever that decision is. But yeah, you could look at that 10 ways to Tuesday and kind of overanalyze it. But no, I'm going to wait and see, and then kind of reflect back and say, why was it that it took this long? And it might be obvious, but we will find out one day this week. Well, we hope. Watch me say that, and it drags into 2 weeks. All right. Just on the topic of Oculus still, and room scale specifically. Now, Oculus had written that very good article I pointed to a couple of days ago, where they get into kind of updated how you should place your cameras, etc., and how much space that's ultimately going to provide you. What I didn't talk about, and neither did Upload VR, but they're kind of reminding through this article today, is the bevy of third-party hardware tools available to assist you with your setup. For example, they don't mention anywhere, and it's certainly not included, that a USB 3.0 active cable is going to benefit you tremendously, which this has. It's 12 or 15 feet long, but allows me to literally run diagonal cameras at the maximum room scale size and distance from each other. Now, there's a list of links. I'm going to include most of them. Most of them are to monoprice, and they're for exactly this, USB 3.0 extension cables. Now, this is going to tie into the next story somewhat, in that the next one also has to do with USB 3.0 and Oculus and setting them up. So what they're also recommending now is that you should use 2 USB 3.0 ports for your room scale VR. In other words, mix and match. Go USB 3.0, but if at all possible, spread that load throughout your computer. In other words, if you bought a USB 3.0 PCI Express card with 4 ports on it, don't use that for all your ports. Maybe your motherboard has 2 USB 3.0 ports. Split off some of that load and overhead onto that, right? Because of the crazy amount of bandwidth that this uses. And you can see with the picture I've probably got up now, that is quite a bit of data traveling back and forth. So anything you can do to offload the work of the adapters, cards, ports that you're using, that's just going to play to your advantage and make the experience that much more smoother, improve your latency, etc. All right. Next up, Lithodomos virtual reality. They have raised close to $700,000 US to bring archaeology to virtual life, as they put it. And at first glance, this looks very much like the Rome experience on Gear VR that I talked about the other day with Universum as the company. What's different with these guys is their focus is preserving endangered archaeological sites. And what I mean by that is Maybe they're endangered because of climate, maybe people. For example, those Buddhist statues, the Buddha ones in Afghanistan. Had we had VR technology back then, 2001, I think, or 2002, when they blew those up, we would have been able to preserve that sort of in a 360-degree way where future generations can marvel at those statues. Sadly now gone. So I get what a program like this is trying to do, and I think it's commendable, and I think it's awesome. And, just by virtue of that, I personally will probably support these guys and purchase it, because I think that's just an awesome thing, period. Now, they've got a couple of experiences. The first one free, and it's basically tours, Paris landmarks, Temple of Venus in Rome, Odeon of Agrippa, Athens, those types of things. So very cool. And the second one is more of a focused premium experience. And what I mean by that is they have basically recreated 2,000-year-old Jerusalem and brought that to life in front of your eyes so that you can experience that in 360 degrees. Was it that lavish looking? It could have been. The temple district there, the housing and stuff that you see could very well have looked exactly like that, or slightly different, or even substantially different. And it's because of the archaeological layers, the way that they pile up in that city, and some of the devastation of the past. It makes a lot of the dating kind of tricky. And of course, you've got certain techniques you can use for dating, but there's certain kind of guidelines on when and how you use those methods without getting way too complicated and technical. Suffice it to say, this program lets you glimpse into what possibly Jerusalem looked like 2,000 years ago. And I see this being used, for all kinds of endangered or close to danger archaeological sites. And let's be realistic, Syria and Iraq have a lot more. The ones that have been destroyed already, just the tip of the iceberg. There's some other gems that hopefully stay intact and can be documented by a program like this. All right, guys, that is it for the news on this Monday. As always, cheers.